Welcome to the Collective Intelligence podcast, where we bring together diverse experiences and perspectives that give you a richer picture of the world.
We've got today with us Kurt Wuckert Jr., who is a Bitcoin historian. So thanks so much, Kurt, for joining us today. Really excited to have you here, talk about Bitcoin, blockchain, and everything in between. So if you don't mind, would you just introduce yourself?
Sure. So like you said, I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr. I'm the chief Bitcoin historian at CoinGeek.com. I'm a Bitcoiner since 2012, and I'm not just a bought some Bitcoin and got lucky guy. I've run mining operations since 2013 on and off. I was a consultant to a crypto-specific hedge fund starting in 2017. I've mined altcoins. I've been involved in altcoins, Ethereum, Monero, that kind of stuff back in 2017. I keep myself up on the space, even though I have become much more of a big block Bitcoin advocate. So I definitely know where I stand and what I believe and why, but I keep myself very much immersed in what everybody else is doing too, to make sure I don't get passed up by not paying attention. So I'm a full timer. My full time job is in the blockchain space, both as a journalist, researcher, documentarian, consultant, and an entrepreneur. So
Pretty full CV.
I'm heavily immersed. Yeah.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And so, like, when you say big blocker, what does that mean to the layperson? Because there's blocks, blockchain, all these terms.
Sure.
Like, how would you break it down?
Basically, I believe that data is money. I think people know this in a basic sense. Some of the biggest companies in the world do nothing but sell your data. In the blockchain space, there's been this conception that blockchains are innately inefficient at transacting data. I think this is a fallacy, and a big blocker believes it is a fallacy. The reason for the term is that there are simple reconciliation periods that occur on a distributed network. So in Bitcoin, that's every 10 minutes, but on Ethereum, for example, it's every like 2.5 seconds. The entire network comes to account, and there is a reconciliation of everything that has been unconfirmed, and then it becomes confirmed and is written to a block.
I see. Wow, it's quite a big difference, like 2.5 seconds to 10 minutes. And
yeah, and they're all over the place. Some blockchain, most blockchains are a little bit quicker than 10 minutes, but there are a couple that do a longer block time as well. And it's just a really complicated way to say, like, it's like how we do tax day once a year in most countries. Like, that's your reconciliation period. We have a 1-year block time on taxes. But
so 10 minutes is pretty good upgrade compared to that.
It is. So that's
validates it at that point in time.
Exactly. So, but in those blocks, every blockchain has a limit for fundamental, the physics of the world. How much data can you transact inside of 10 minutes? There are people that want to keep very, very small blocks for various reasons. And so that would be your typical small blocker argument. And there are people like me who say, we should push the limits. We should see how much data we can process in the block time. So that's what makes me a big blocker.
And I guess that probably drives a lot of innovation, like in terms of capacity of networks and what you can physically put down a wire in 10 minutes. And if you're really pushing those limits, I imagine you can do more and more.
Precisely. And the spillover benefits benefit the whole world. I mean, it's just like anything else. You can look at like World War II and talk about what a terrible thing that it was, but then you can look at the science that came out of it on the other end and say, well, it did give us rocket propulsion and various radio technologies and radar and all these other things that have spillover benefits. And so when you're competing with people, especially when it's like a life or death scenario, or when, if it's like, man, if I don't solve this problem in 9 months, I'm broke and homeless. It's very motivating.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I believe in pushing that. Like, there's not a reason to be in business if you're not there to, go broke or become rich. So that's the motivator.
Definitely. And it sounds like you're pretty entrepreneurial by spirit, and you got into this very early, like just literally maybe a few years, if not earlier, after it was conceived. So what drew you to the area? Because I think in recent years we've seen people, especially since around 2016, 2017, just banking on the kind of, let's make 100x in a day or something.
Right.
And it's just maybe drawn the wrong people to the crowd. But it sounds like you've been there so early. So what were your motivations for
So yeah, it wasn't any of that. I'm not a finance guy. I find money fascinating, obviously, but I think money's interesting as a measuring stick. I take a very philosophical position on like what money is as a tool to the world and human interaction in general. I mean, money is just a thing to reduce friction between our relationships. So we can't just all perform services for one another in exchange for the things we need. We have to specialize, and then we get paid in money that allows us to do other things. And so I always really liked the philosophy of money, and I always really liked tech. I used to buy used computers and fix them up and hot rod them and resell them and stuff like that. So I worked in IT on and off, and I've worked in cybersecurity on and off for many, many years. I owned a printing company in 2012. It was one of the things I was up to. And I had one of my money philosophy friends come to me and say, Kurt, I need you to print me posters. We're going to a protest to protest Federal Reserve monetary policy. And I'm going to pay you in Bitcoin. And I didn't know what Bitcoin was, but he helped me put together my first wallet, and he paid me, I didn't even know, like $50 or something worth of Bitcoin at the time, which was probably a whole Bitcoin at that point. Not a bad trade.
Not bad, yeah.
And
thousands and thousands of dollars today.
Yes, and it's funny because I didn't really think anything of it. He told me like, Kurt, it's like video game money, and I was like, man, for $50, I don't really care. That's fine. And but then I went down the rabbit hole a few months later because I was like, yeah, I should really look into like what is this thing that I've been given. And once I read into it, started to do my own research, I realized like, oh, this is not just video game money. This is a very disruptive, very important piece of technology. And then I've just been kind of obsessed with it ever since. So that's
I think I've been the same in the last few years, where you kind of, I got lured in because of the 100x. I was like, oh, what is this? But then you start digging and you poke, and you're like, there's something actually really big and really interesting here that could revolutionize everything we do. So, I mean, could you tell us a bit more about why it's disruptive? Like, what are the things about Bitcoin, about blockchain, that makes it so valuable, more than the kind of just transactional values?
I think the first thing to know is that there's not a whole lot of new technology in Bitcoin. I'm a martial artist. Like one of the major things that I like to do is I like to fight. And so I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner, specifically in Brazilian jiu-jitsu lineage. But our lineage actually branches off of judo. And so judo and jiu-jitsu actually share the same parentage and they share the same moves. But the reason why they look very different, if you look at judo, it looks very different from jiu-jitsu. You say, well, in jiu-jitsu, you're rolling around on the floor a lot. And in judo, everybody's trying to throw each other. So how are they the same martial art? And the answer is it's the rule set. The rules to win the game are different. And that's really the brilliant invention of Bitcoin, is it's a change of rules in the way that you distribute money and the way that you use computer science to issue money and create a game that makes people want to secure the network. Because without that, you have to rely on a trusted third party. You need to have the profit motive of a company like Visa or MasterCard or your local bank. And they secure your payments and things like that. But that's a trust model. And as we've seen many times, even just over the last couple of months, when your prime minister says, well, it's a state of emergency, all of a sudden your bank account just gets shut off if you're part of the wrong political movement. And so that's a real problem. That's a trust model that doesn't work for a lot of things. But in Bitcoin, we have a different trust model. There's still trust, but it's a different thing, because what everybody's doing is they're competing to be the best accountant, basically, for the global ledger. So in Bitcoin, because there's this 10-minute payment period, every payment that's sent inside of this 10-minute period just gets cycled around. It gets propagated to all the computers, and all the computers are competing to be the one to write them to the global ledger the most efficiently or in some other way that creates value. And whoever does that is given a reward for being the best at writing to the ledger. And so there is a gamification of the security where I myself run a mining pool. So I am a Bitcoin mining pool operator, and I'm trying like heck to be the best at writing transactions to the ledger. because when I do, I am rewarded by the algorithm of the network in newly minted coins. So I receive Bitcoins that did not exist before I mined them. And that's my profit motive. That's my reward for doing that job well.
Gotcha.
And so I realized, like, interesting. So I don't have to trust, some bureaucrat, some politician, some Federal Reserve Board chairman, some central banker somewhere that thinks that my interest rate should go up or down, or, maybe print $30 trillion over the course of a 2-year period and make it that, all of a sudden milk is twice as much money as it was 6 months ago. And, there's all these things that I really don't like about fiat currency, but I also don't see fiat currency as like an innate enemy like many Bitcoiners do. They look at things and say, we want to destroy the system and replace it with Bitcoin. And I don't think that's the case. I think Bitcoin creates competition in a way where whoever is the best at creating value for everyone else is the best competitor. So in many things, a good competitor is detrimental to the other people around them. Think like the biggest shark in the ocean, right? Is starving out everyone else by consuming too much. But in Bitcoin, you really can't do that. If you do that, you become what's called a dishonest node, and you become penalized by the system. And so I think it's this perfect harmonious balance without being, it's not altruistic. There's not some person slapping wrists or telling you how to behave, but there is this perfectly balanced economic incentive to secure the system, and whoever secures the system is given the most power in the system. But as soon as you begin to fail at it, if you become lazy or if you become malicious, it starts to take some of that power away from you. So your king is always the most valuable king. And so it's a system that really makes money better by really understanding human incentives and human nature, and really giving us a way to issue the currency and transact the currency in a way that is as mutually beneficial as anything that I've ever seen in my life. I think it is the most mutually beneficial system that's ever existed. And I could go into a million reasons why that is, but I think I've given you the most simple version of that explanation.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting the way you describe it as well, because you've got me thinking about it as a bit of a democracy where always the best value adder or the best person is able to add that value and be the block, add the next block to the chain or
Right.
whatever it is, and validate the chain before.
And I mean, in theory, it's perfect capitalism, but it really is like it's what Adam Smith would look at it and say, oh, here's the right way to implement it. Like, because capitalism does, it becomes gamified, and you get these pockets of, nasty fascism, or like, the most capitalist thing for me to do would be to cozy up to the government and ensure that I get more money than I deserve, and that kind of thing. And so there are some perverse incentives in capitalist systems, especially when they're tied close to governmental systems, and that's why we have corruption, crony capitalism, and that kind of thing. But Bitcoin really genuinely doesn't allow that to occur. So it's just incredible there. And I dare I say, I would say it's the perfect example of perfect capitalism.
I know what you mean, because you want to incentivize the right behaviors, which it sounds like it does very well. And one of the things I've read about it is that the technology by nature, it's immutable. You can't cheat it, you can't fake it, you can't forger it, and there's some really interesting maths, I think, behind it as well, like some elliptical finite curves. I started going down a weird rabbit hole there, and it's just really fascinating that it just by the nature of it, it can't really be broken in the same way that we know things are these days, which is such a unique thing. And it's probably not worth going into the maths, except saying, like, I don't know, unless is there anything worth saying on that topic? Because as an engineer myself, I was like, but surely you could just hack it, surely you could break it. But
it's funny because it's humans. Like, when people say, you get people that will very obtusely say, well, you can't hack Bitcoin, and you can. Like, it's improbable. It is mathematically improbable, and is always getting more and more improbable over time. So it's like, there's always people that want there to be a perfect system, and perfect systems don't exist. Like, it's like thinking about a global ecosystem, and we like to think, well, if we just had the perfect manager of these things, and maybe are humans parasitic in the world because we consume too much of X? and we create too much waste. And maybe the response is maybe, but if you zoom out far enough, you look at it and say, well, humans, we're just part of nature too, and we're playing our role. Like we are balancing out some other thing. And so Bitcoin's the same way, where it is perfectly imperfect. Like Satoshi was not a miser. He was not just super into planning to the point where he thought he could plan out every specific circumstance, but he created flexibility in the economics of the system that would drive it to have a cultural solution to certain things, where it's like, sometimes you want to go to one brain surgeon over another. If you have like an inoperable tumor, you want to find the best brain surgeon. But the funny thing is, the best brain surgeons all probably go to one of the same like 3 to 5 schools. But then you get that person he's special for some reason. And there may not be a reason for that, except for that there's just something special about that person. And you say, well, why is that person's success rate higher? And the answer is we don't know. And that's okay. Like some people are special, and that's a good thing. And Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, specifically designed the system to allow for special people to be special and to make the system more secure by virtue of the fact that they have some specialized talent that creates other things. So it's a general purpose network, but its security allows for people to be rewarded for being extremely creative as well. So that's part of the economics in the math. But then, we can talk about SHA-256 or elliptical curve cryptography, and there's
we'll save that one for another time. But yeah, it is.
There really is brilliance to all of it, especially in some of the things that you can do with various algorithms and stuff. But that would be a deep in the weeds show for sure.
Yeah. But I think there's a really good point there around balance, isn't there? Like everything has an impact, but when you weigh things up, Bitcoin is okay. There might be weaknesses, but actually, the probability of anything happening, like there's probability of us being like hit by a meteorite at any point, but like for the benefit you get out of it, it sounds like infinitely higher.
Exactly. Well, and that's the beauty of it. Anytime you could think to destroy the system, in order for you to do the work to destroy the system, you could have profited from the system by doing that same amount of work with good intentions. And so
it's always more in,
right. It's always more valuable for you to, and a lot more valuable for you to secure the system, use the system. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, that's what I mean about that perfect balance, where it's like, as I learned how to destroy it, it made me want to participate.
That's a good line. So just moving on then, we've talked a bit about what it is and how it works, but what kind of applications do you see with Bitcoin and blockchain? Because I think this is where I'm getting to the stage, I'm seeing some really interesting projects out there, like games and medical records. It is ultimately a ledger which can't be changed. You see all the previous transactions. It keeps a record that is very secure and non-centralized. So what kind of things do you see coming up in the future that would be like of high value?
Sure. I think, well, the Eli 5, which is how people like to break things down now, is
explain like M5 for those.
Yes. If you have any business process or any human process that would benefit from reduced payment friction or increased data integrity, that is something that a blockchain can provide you. Now, that's as simple as I can make it, but I think both things need to be clarified.
I think I got it.
So for example, I like to tell people Bitcoin generally makes it as easy for me to do business with someone in South Carolina as I can with someone in South Korea. The reason is that there is not a cross-border aspect of the system that requires checkpoints, or I don't need to get permission to convert Bitcoins into Korean money. I'm an American. I can do it instantly. It is an instant global payment system. And so if we can get over the fact that we like to measure value in our localized fiat currencies, which is something that I believe we can do with data. So we can say that data is worth a certain amount of Bitcoins per byte or kilobyte of data. If we can treat data as money, this becomes very simple. But with people right now, if I want to do business in Japan or something and convert to the yen or something, all of that can be attested to on chain, and I can send instant payments. If I were to send you a payment right now, you're on the other side of the globe as me, as I understand it. You would receive it in less than 2 seconds. It is yours. I can't take it back. The arbitration process for me to remove it would be too costly. And so that's yours. By all means, we just did business across the globe in 2 seconds. And that can be any kind of transaction. It can be micropayments. This can be something to the tune of thousandths of pennies, which is great for very simple applications like, Kurt, we need this light bulb to be on in Mozambique for the next 20 minutes. Can you pay for it at this address? And you can connect an Internet of Things device to a light bulb in Mozambique and make that happen. Simply pay a light bill for a small amount of time. So micropayments are very disruptive, but there's also nothing stopping me from sending billions of dollars in a transaction as well. And you don't have to deal with the cross-border restrictions of that either. So it revolutionizes payments. Now,
on the
data integrity.
Just a quick question on the microtransactions, because that's quite interesting. So you could theoretically pay for like minute amounts of energy for like one use, or and I'm thinking like if you go to an airport or something and you need to charge your phone in a future where the energy prices have skyrocketed, which doesn't seem so far at the moment. And you could tap and say, right, charge this to this amount, and it'll be very easy to do, but infinitesimally small. Like, that's quite an interesting.
There was an experiment. It was a couple of years ago. I don't know if the project still exists, but there was a guy that connected a Bitcoin wallet to a machine that dispenses chicken food, like little pellets of chicken food, and he had a camera on it, and it just had a wallet address, and so you could hop on Twitch and look at the live stream of the chickens, and you could pay the address, and the second it received the address, it would instantly feed the chickens. And it was like a penny or maybe 25 cents or something to feed the chickens, but you could go on at any time and show people, hey, here's the power of Bitcoin. This farm is in Kentucky or something. And from anywhere in the world, you can instantly pay, and you watch the machine dispense the food and feed the chickens. And so this is just a very novel application, but it's something that could actually be the case. Like, this is how we could dispense all sorts of items of value around the world, and charitable or commercial or whatever. And there's a lot of application there. So,
and it's that microtransactions. It sounds like there's a lot of potential to drive innovation in, like, so gaming is one thing I've heard of, where you can record things on a ledger, on a blockchain, and it might be microtransactions, but then they also will be owned by that player if they make a certain raft of moves.
Correct.
That's their kind of fingerprint signature or something.
And this is important in places like the Philippines, for example. There's a lot of people in the Philippines that are living on just a couple dollars a day. And for them, they need to be able to spend 25 cents or maybe less on things. And so there are some very simple applications like that, but there's also like Internet of Things. So there's all these IoT devices that rather than having them do like an OAuth handshake, which is just an IT term for them to connect to each other, you can actually have it be trustless. And rather than using Wi-Fi and everything having to be signed in, they could communicate through near field technology and send each other, a 10,000th of a penny or something, and say, oh, okay, like, I trust you because you've paid me to trust you to do a certain job. And so you can firewall your items in your home so that somebody can't come from, outside the home and like burn your house down by tricking your toaster. But you can have your vacuum and your toaster and all of your other stuff around your house paying each other all day to do various things. And I mean, you can have less than $1 in the account that they're all using, but you're utilizing this micropayment system to manage your own home. But this can also be done in massive factories, like smart factories that are doing all kinds of specific things. So you're utilizing it as a security feature rather than like an economic payments, but you're using that microtransaction as a way to say like, okay, that sending address was expected to be this address, and it was, and therefore this is trusted, and we can move forward in the process. And so there's a lot of application.
There's like a knock-on effect. You can do bigger and bigger things and manufacture something okay.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yep. So then the other thing is data integrity. So blockchains are by their very nature public. Anybody can audit them. You can audit every payment that has ever occurred on any public blockchain. You can go all the way back to 2009 on Bitcoin, and you can go all the way back to the beginning of every single blockchain, and you can see every single transaction that was ever sent on every single blockchain, period. So what does that mean? If you can think about payments or whatever, but you can also think about things like chain of custody data. Chain of custody is a place that is rife with fraud, for one. So just straight up malice. Like, if you're shipping a container of iPhones across the sea, and you're a person working at the port, you can say, okay, well, this iPhone is mine because the box was already partially opened. I can see inside. I'm going to take it. Nobody can stop me. The other thing is just plain incompetence or things that you can't control. There's a lot of variables in global freight that you cannot decide upon, but you could take what we call NFT technology, which is a fancy way of saying a unique digital item or a digital twin of a physical thing. And you can tag these things at the time that they leave the back dock of your manufacturing company. And every time they hit a checkpoint, so this is anytime it hits a regional hub or hits a port or hits hits the prime meridian and crossing the ocean or whatever, it can checkpoint that NFT data and say, okay, it was still on track at this point. It was still on track at this point. So you can have major fraud reduction and an extreme reduction in the accounting that is done after the fact. Accounting is months and months out for these big companies because it gets delivered and then the manifests have to be shipped around and all of this other stuff. Even the ones that do it digitally, there's just major backlogs, but this can be programmed into the system to utilize applications on the blockchain that just do the entire accounting of everything as it happens. So the moment the items are delivered, they're already reconciled, they're already on the books, it's just done.
Yeah, huge value there, isn't there?
Huge value, just an immense amount of economic value there.
And there's a big element of sustainability there as well, I think, because you can track, and not just kind of environmental sustainability, but all the other elements of kind of making sure something is manufactured where they say it's been manufactured, or the workers have like the correct rights. You can put that all into the chain, and it can be logged as you go along. And so when you receive that item, you can trace it back and see where it's been. So I think there's a lot of ethical.
It can be each handler too. Like you can know if somebody just plainly does their job 10% worse than another person at the company, or 10% worse than the average, or whatever. And I think about things like your automobile. What if your car was an NFT, and every time that you made a service visit, right? So it's like you update your NFT and say, okay, this person changed their oil 100 miles early every single interval, which means they wanted to proactively take care of their car. And therefore, this car has more value than a comparable car that waited an extra 500 miles late to change their oil every single time. But then it can also say and maybe it was the master technician at the oil change place rather than the intern that was doing the job every time too. And the more data that you can aggregate about things, the more value that you can give to an item by knowing its history. And people know this intrinsically. Like people buy food, they pay premiums for organic food because presumably somebody is tracking the chain of custody of that food as well. And if you can give people more data, they will pay more for the item where the data is clearly verifiable. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate. Let's say you did have a car and somebody did change their oil 100 miles early. So you get this data book or through the blockchain, you see all that data. What added value does that have compared to like a logbook of a car that somebody gives you when they've purchased it? And you can see, okay, this was the person and their qualifications that did everything. They changed their oil every 7,000 miles or whatever it was. Like, where's the added value then? If we could do it all by paper or even on on the ledger.
It's the trust. It's completely the trust model. I fill out my logbook, but I have bought used cars where nobody ever filled it out once, and so I just have to assume.
Yeah.
And so you kind of remove you remove incompetence and you remove malice from the equation, because there's both. There are people that are incompetent and there are people that are malicious, and there's a lot of people in the middle that want to do well and generally do well. But data is a really difficult thing to trust. But the more data that we have, the more easy it is to spot bad data. Yeah. Like you can see derivations from the norm much more quickly if you have a larger and larger data set. So the more data we have, the more you can, or the more quickly you can point out, oh wait, this is wrong. I wrote an article about 2 years ago about global warming, which until COVID-19 came around was the most politically contentious data aggregation piece.
It's getting knocked down the list, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. All of a sudden, global warming, like, I don't know, man, those were the good old days when we were fighting about that. But I wrote an article about how much loss of data has existed in the history of climate information. And so whether you're on the right or the left of the notion of climate change, like whether it exists or not is one question, and then whether or not humans are involved or responsible in the process of climate change is another question. Both of those things should not be political questions. They should be data-driven questions that we don't have to question. They should just be the data. Yeah. And so I wrote an article about how we should have oracles around the planet that ping temperature change every time there's a temperature change globally forever and puts them on the blockchain. Because as soon as something is wrong, or as soon as somebody tries to change that data, we know that somebody tried to change the data. Or as soon as one of the oracles goes down, you know it went down. And instead of having, oh shoot, the MIT lost 6 months worth of weather data, or Cambridge University was doing a giant study and some person there had a serious political agenda and decided to skew the records or whatever. Sorry, the data's all on chain. We know when it's changing, how it's changing, and that makes it much more easy to determine why it's changing. And so this allows us to have conversations that are no longer political, but they are data-driven, and it allows us to come up with data-driven solutions for these things as well. And I mean, how valuable is that? Like that is, it's incredible.
I think there's elements there as well. Like when you have trust in the data, you don't have to question people's motives behind it. And I think that actually inches us closer to like a more just world as well, where you're not having to kind of fight these battles because. And it removes those intentions, doesn't it? So that, I think they sound like little things, and I think for people coming in and listening, it might not be like, oh, trust. Okay, well, surely like I trust my local garage, or I trust the scientists here. But I think there is a really important message there around these small kind of bits of trust actually add up and really do snowball and can cause huge change in the way we do everything.
Absolutely.
Really.
Yep.
So yeah, that's really fascinating. You touched on NFTs, so I think that's non-fungible tokens, non-replaceable tokens. There's a lot of stuff going on out there about people spending hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars on apes and all sorts of art, and all this speculation around how much it'll be worth, and people just pouring money in to get liquidity in the markets just so people can cash out and run away with money. There's just so much stuff there, but what do you see? We talked a bit about NFTs can be anything. It can be a car that you keep a track of on the blockchain. It can be an actual digital item on the blockchain, like a picture. What could you expand a bit more, like what you know about NFTs and their value? Like how else can they be used?
So right now they're used almost exclusively as a proof of purchase for selling digital art. That's what people want to do with them. They want to create JPEGs that are, there's one of one, except for the fact that you can right click it and save it on your computer. But whoever owns the right to the blockchain transaction that indicates ownership of that JPEG is the owner of that JPEG. And there's a massive hype cycle around it right now because it's pretty trivial to create a unique piece of. I mean, there's probably a billion graphic designers on the planet, and every one of them would like to earn more money. So that's great if you can earn 50 grand because you made some apes that are aesthetically pleasing and you sold them and made some good money. Like that's pretty cool, but that is only a very novelty use of the technology. The other thing is that the law around it is a little bit goofy. Like it's actually unclear the way that things are set up, whether you own the JPEG or if you only own the numbers that call back to it. So you may actually only own the transaction hash because it hasn't really been established.
I've got a receipt somewhere that is like
exactly. You own the receipt. You don't own the thing you bought. So it's not cool. But it's kind of like owning an operating system where like you don't own your copy of Windows or Mac OS either. You own the license like to one copy, but you don't actually own the system you're using. So it's a little bit of an abstraction of that concept, but it's just a major bubble, frankly, because JPEGs are not worth tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And but it's a novel use of the technology. Now, what people can use it for, I actually do like some of the high art things. Like people are buying like verified pieces of Banksy art or Jackson Pollock or whatever else, because there's a lot of fraud and corruption in art dealer that industry as well, where you're looking at something and this is even from reputable dealers where they can't tell that it's a fake. They think they have valid chain of custody documents and whatever. And so this allows for just one more aspect of that attestation of validity using the technology, but it's still a little goofy the way it's implemented because people don't really understand the technology very well. So even though they say like, here's your NFT, like people aren't tech savvy enough, and there aren't like auditing tools that are publicly available for people to say, okay, even if I'm getting an NFT, am I getting the actual NFT of this actual thing? So there's a lot of ways to easily confuse people into thinking they did the right thing and it's been falsified. So there's still a lot of work to be done there, but
it sounds like it can be a lot more than just artwork. So I mean, one good example I've heard of recently is I guess use on things like Spotify and downloading music, and you might have the creator who owns it, and then you can kind of buy into it. You can be a part owner and own an NFT based on that kind of piece of music, and then for every stream of it, you would earn money. Is that am I kind of interpreting that right? So
pretty much, yeah. So there's a competitor right now, and there's a few people doing this, but the one that I like is called Jamify. Okay. So they're doing exactly that. Like instead of having digital rights management managed by a company like Spotify, it's actually managed publicly on the blockchain. And so when there is a play, the creator or producers or anybody else involved who should be paid get paid their fair cut instantly on the blockchain. And you can pay once to hear your favorite song, and maybe that's less than a penny if you just want to play it once, or you can pay to have perpetual plays or whatever you want to do too. But you can pre-program all of that stuff. So it takes a lot of power away from the gatekeepers.
And I think that's it's another area where microtransactions are really valuable, because nobody wants to pay like even maybe a cent per song play, because that will play out.
Yeah, if it's your favorite song, you're spending too much money on it. Yeah.
But $1,000 or like 10,000th of a cent or a penny, it's probably going to be less than your Spotify subscription per month.
Exactly.
How much you pay, and then the artist will get paid probably more as well.
Right. They get paid directly. You cut out the weird middlemen. You cut out the advertiser royalties and all of that, and you give ownership to the artist. Like traditionally, artists have been severely taken advantage of in the music industry. So it's a really good way to let people say, hey, here's the art that I've created. I don't have an agent. I don't have a record label. So you can buy my art directly, and I get paid directly when you listen to it. And so that's a really good opportunity there.
And I think just brings me on to one of the final questions around having developers that can build these apps and just make really good, disruptive, unique projects out there that can work on blockchain. I've been told and have been reading that blockchain, it can be thought of a little bit as an operating system or as a kind of internet where you can build things onto. It's Web3 and you hear all these terms, but being able to build on top of it, like creativity, you can almost do what you like. There's no real limit. And we're talking about things like, ownership of cars and manufacturing and supply chain issues and music. These are things that have been done and that we'd replicate onto it, but there's probably an entire world out there that we haven't even begun to explore yet. So what would your message be to anybody interested out there that's maybe a coder and is thinking about entering the space?
I mean, it's the next frontier, and there's limitless opportunity. Sorry, I got screaming kids in the background. there's limitless opportunity. Like, we're talking about being at the forefront of a revolution of digital rights ownership and physical property ownership in a way that can't be coerced away from you. So you could even distribute your software licenses on the blockchain as NFTs. Like, it's the same thing. If somebody's going to download the tool set or the operating system or the game that you created, you can be paid in that download, or it can be pay by use if you want it to be like a SaaS product, for example, which is where a lot of apps have gone. Like, I used to buy Adobe Creative Suite, and now I just pay X amount per year to use Adobe Creative Suite. And it's just a really different model. But for a developer, you can do that. You can just distribute software that has nothing to do with blockchain, but distribute your software on the blockchain. Or you can become a developer that creates applications on the blockchain that can only exist in a blockchain-based world. And this would be things like micropayment gaming. You can't do PayPal or you can do centralized token management, but there's all kinds of cybersecurity risks and custody risks and things like that. But you can do games where people can transact for less than a penny between, and they just keep going back and forth. It can be game tokens or whatever else. And so there's a lot of opportunity for people that know just basic JavaScript and things like that, which is the most common programming language in the world, is the most frequently used in the blockchain space too. So just a good JavaScript developer can start with a simple development kit, and they learn it in a couple of days, and they can be developing games and apps and token protocols and all kinds of stuff. So
going down the wormhole for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, cool. That's really good. And so yeah, just to end then. So where do you see us going in the next 5 years? I know there's this. We kind of have talked a bit about blockchain, and it's a fairly complex kind of thing to wrap your head around, I think. But then there's also another whole bunch of stuff going on around lawsuits and claims to who owns Bitcoin. We know of like Craig Wright, who's kind of shown himself in court to be the creator and owner of the original Bitcoin, and is this mad genius. But where do you see the next 5, 10, 20 years going with this? What kind of future?
Oh man, actually, I think Satoshi Nakamoto said it best. It's either going to be everything or nothing. The way that it's designed is to absorb value by creating value, by making it that if you try to compete against the blockchain economy, you're going to fail in the long term. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will win. I do think that we will win, but foolishness and malice are major problems with humanity. Like, there have been many great ideas that just never get used because we're too foolish to use them. So if the economy continues to be based on buy this token, hold for a year, sell, and you get a Lamborghini out the other end, like that is not the basis of an economy. And this is a real problem when people feel like it's creates an opportunity cost for you to attempt to build a business. And so that culture really, really needs to change, or else it's all worthless, frankly. But I am hopeful. I am very hopeful that we will get people that look at the technology and say, oh my goodness, this is the solution to my payment friction problem or my data integrity problem for my important business model. And there will be great entrepreneurs. There will be your Andrew Carnegies and your John Rockefellers and your JP Morgans and stuff that look at this and say, you know what? This is an opportunity for me to change the entire world and make a lot of money doing it not by holding tokens, but by turning the planet into your customers and then providing efficiency, creating a real economy, things that make the world a better place. And so if I'm right, we will have a renaissance of personal property ownership, real private property ownership of intellectual property that you could not own in any other way. And ultimately, I believe that a culture of people that have ownership of their things, it changes.
They're empowered, aren't they? And
exactly. We want people to be empowered and to leverage the things that they actually own to make their lives better. So this this is a hopeful mission that I am on here for the sake of blockchain.
It's super exciting, and it's an incredible space, I think. And if one thing I've struggled with was where to find good information. If you want to build, if you want to learn more about it, there's a lot of stuff out there, and I sometimes don't know what to trust. I mean, do you have any recommendations?
I think partially, yeah. I mean, be very careful for one. Almost everybody is trying to sell you a get rich quick scheme. Even if it seems like a revolutionary concept, people need to know that, first of all, every blockchain does the same thing. They do it at different speeds and for different costs, but they all do the same thing. They write data to a global ledger. That's it. That's all the technology does. So for me, I am a big supporter of the BSV blockchain because it is the most scalable. You can do more with it for less money than on any other blockchain in existence. It does not have a long dev roadmap. It's not full of promises that may or may not get fulfilled. If you wanted to start a business today and you needed it to scale in 6 months to have 1 billion customers, it is the only blockchain that could handle it. Every other one would break down well before you got to anything like those numbers. And so if you wanted to learn more about that, you could go to bitcoinsv.com for a very basic overview. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at Kurt Wuckert JR on Twitter. And you can find me at kurtwuckertjr.com as well. You can send me a note. I do a little bit of consulting, and I do connect some dots when people have business ideas and looking for development help or that kind of thing too. But really just be very, very careful more than anything. I don't want to. It's hard for me to say you can trust me, but don't trust anybody else. But it's roughly what I'm saying.
We've been on the podcast now. Of course, we can trust you. It's fine.
Right? You can trust me. I promise. So it's hard because it's one of those things where like you have to trust somebody who's put in a lot of proof of work. And I can tell you right now that for me, I am building businesses in the space. I'm not asking people to buy my tokens. I'm not telling you, hey, I'm raising funds and this thing's going to make you rich. BSV may not make you rich. It certainly hasn't made me rich by just holding BSV. But that's not the point. BSV is the toll to the network. And what you do with that toll is entirely up to you. So if you want to sell global data from an immutable blockchain back to the economy in ways that can't be sold in any other way, that's your opportunity. And right now it's being used largely for gaming, NFT trading, and other stuff like that. But there's tons of commercial and enterprise applications. There's a company out of Belgium called Mint Blue that is doing a bunch of just enterprise data allocation, and they're reselling that data back to the company after it's been processed, because they can say, yes, this data set is valid because we processed every single transaction using Bitcoin. And these are the kind of things where if you can make that business deal, you can't attest to it any other way. You can't run it on your private server. You have to say, we gave it to the public auditor, this digital supercomputer out there that people are competing to do the best, and it gave us this sum. This is as correct as it could possibly be. And so basically bitcoinsv.com, and by all means you can send me a DM. I'd love to talk to people that want to learn more.
Great, thanks very much. And for businesses out there, like I've heard like Nchain is big on developing as well. And
yes,
is that a good place to go?
Nchain is a very big British consulting firm and software development firm. Like they probably have 200 employees that are doing everything from research and development to product development and whatever else. But if you were, say, a government and wanted to issue like government currency or move like titles and deeds and things to the blockchain, N-Chain is the kind of company that could license you that kind of technology to put on the BSV blockchain. Or you could reach out to one of the major mining pools. So I run Gorilla Pool. So if you wanted to send transactions to us and have us verify data for you on the blockchain, we could do that. But there's also TAL, which is a publicly traded Canadian company. It's spelled TAAL. They're named after the Filipino volcano. And cool. Yeah, but there's lots of companies in the space that would happily consult in order to help move you to a place where your data is being processed instantaneously on the blockchain to give you an edge on your competition.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, thanks very much, Kurt. I think we'll end it there, but thank you so much. Really, really interesting. So much there, I think, to delve into, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon. So thanks again.
Sounds good.